contributions, and that way we'll be able to get everybody in comfortably. David Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Listening to the Justice Secretary is always a pleasure. He was calm, he was reflective, and he was committed to, I think, to try to improve the services. But he knows that that calmness and that reflectiveness actually hides a shambles over the past 6.5 years since his predecessor, the Right Honourable Member for Epsom and Newell, took the decision to split the probation service from serious offenders to low-level offenders and to ensure that contracts were given to organisations which self-evidently, through the National Audit Office, through the National Probation Inspectorate, through his own department, through the Justice Committee and through everybody else who's looked at it, have not performed to the standards that he would expect, in a way that he would expect, to protect the public at large. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, let's just forget the Secretary of State's calm demeanour. He knows his government has presided over a complete shambles, and he is now going to do his best to make the best of that bad job to repair that damage. The points I want to make, Madam Deputy Speaker, are reflected in what has been said by the National Audit Office and what has been said by the Chief Inspector of Probation. If we look at the probation service, we know, and what we know, is that in 2013, the Ministry embarked on a reform of probation services. It split the serious offenders for a national probation service, and it established community rehabilitation companies which, halfway through the current term of their office, were proved to be costing the taxpayer resources because of their inefficiencies, increasing the overall percentage of number of reoffences per offender by 22% and underperforming. They did certainly, yes, overall 2.5 percentage point reduction in the proportion of reoffenders since 2011. The government had a target of 3.5% reduction. They underperformed on the government's own targets. Now, the National Audit Office have had an opportunity to look at this matter, and they have said quite clearly, and I quote, "Patchy involvement with the third sector, one of the government's major objectives. Limited innovation and lack of progress transforming probation service, one of the government's key objectives. Significant increases in the number of people being recalled to prison. Being recalled to prison because the supervision was failing them in the community, and my constituents and others were being impacted by that, by greater levels of offences in their area. Ineffective through the gate services to support transition from prison to the community." The key element that the Right Honourable Member for Epsom and Newell, who really, Madam Deputy Speaker, should be answering this debate today to be accountable for the position that he put his honourable friend, Right Honourable friend, in today. The objectives that the Right Honourable Gentleman for Epsom and Newell set have not been met. My colleagues from the Justice Committee, my honourable friend, the Chair of the Justice Committee and other members who are here today, we did a full report into the current state of affairs of CRCs and probation. And we have come to a conclusion, not Labour members of Parliament, not former ministers like myself, but the cross-party agreement that it was a mistake to introduce transforming rehabilitation reforms without beginning a pilot. It was a mistake. We agree that it significantly overestimated the ability of CRCs to reduce their costs to match any fall in income when it agreed the contracts. We agreed fully that we were unconvinced that splitting offenders by risk was the right way to split the probation system. We agreed on a cross-party basis that transforming rehabilitation changes weakened local partnership, weakened local accountability, and there was less joined-up work and collaboration at a local level. Now, all of those things matter, Madam Deputy Speaker, because this is about preventing crime. It's about turning people's lives around who have been in prison, who need support in the community. And the government has not, as yet, accounted for the cost of this failure, for the performance of this failure, and for the reasons that bad decisions were made by ministers in rushing through these proposals without due consideration. So the Secretary of State can, by all means, do a calm, professional job, and I tip my professional Member of Parliament hat to him in doing that. But he is presiding over the failure of predecessors of his, and he has a job now to improve that. This very morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, I asked the Chief Inspector of Probation in the Justice Committee, Did these things make the position worse? These changes make the position worse? She said, on being pressed a couple of times, yes, they did. So the government today, I think, needs to account for this failure. We had 110 years of a probation service that had pride in its staff, high levels of morale, delivered an effective service, and within the space of 6 years, the government have put people at risk, split the service, reduced the level of competence, not had an effective service, shaken up that service, and are now in a position whereby they're having to rebuild. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, how do they rebuild? They have had a model which has been discussed about Wales. In Wales, they've brought the probation service back together as a public service. I'd like to see not the justification as to why they've done that. I'd like to see the justification as to why they haven't elsewhere in the United Kingdom. The government has a consultation, again, in a calm, collective, professional way. The Minister has sort of batted that ball and taken those hits. He has a consultation. The outcome of that consultation, Madam Deputy Speaker, should be clear. The probation service performed better when it was a unified body working with serious and lower risk offenders, when it had drug rehabilitation services, community payback services under its wing. And yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, it can contract some of those services to the private sector. A drug charity might do a good drug rehabilitation service. A local workplace scheme might be best provided by a local charity or a voluntary organisation. When I took the community offender bill through this House of Commons in 2007, that was the type of private sector involvement and voluntary sector involvement we were seeking. It wasn't about the splitting of this service. So I simply say to the Minister, because I'm coming to the end of my 8 minutes, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I want to know who's accountable for this mess. If the Secretary of State will just stand up and say, my predecessors, that will help. I want to know consistently what has been the impact of this mess. There's a whole range of things that he knows and I know have gone wrong, that he knows and I know are not performing. And it's his job to actually come clean and say those things in a professional way. And I'm very clear to have, Madam Deputy Speaker, what happens next. And it's clear to me on the probation side, I haven't got time to talk about prisons, but on the probation side, I fully support my honourable friend for Leeds East in the belief that we bring this service back into the public sector to meet the needs of our constituents, to reduce crime, to turn offenders' lives around, and he should stand up at the end of this speech, and welcome to his new Prisons Minister in doing that, who will respond to this speech. He should stand up and say, I've looked at this, I've been in office now for two days, maybe 3 days. I've come to a conclusion that actually it was an unholy mess from my predecessors, and I commit to bring this service back into the public sector.